George Washington's first victory. Young George Washington was almost ready for school. He finished eating his cornbread and brushed away a few crumbs. His mother, Mary, sat at the head of the table. "George," she said, "please come right home after your lessons are over." Mary Washington didn't like it when George was away for too long. George's father, Gus, had died a few months earlier. George was 11 years old, and he was now the man of the house. "I won't forget," said George, standing up. His mother nodded. "Thank you." George stopped for a moment. He wanted to ask one last question. George took a deep breath. What about my visit to Lawrence?" he asked. Lawrence was George's big brother. He was married and lived in a house called Mount Vernon. It was 30 miles away. Lawrence wanted George to come for a visit, and George very much wanted to go. "We will discuss it further," said his mother, "after you got home." "But," George began. His mother held up her hand. "Remember the sixth rule. Speak not when you should hold your peace." George knew all 110 rules of the civility. In other words, think before you speak. So George remained silent. As George rode to the ferry to school, he had time to think. Perhaps his mother worried that if he went away, she would go hungry. George knew how to fish and hunt. What if he caught a lot of food? Would his mother feel differently? George looked down from the water. He knew his mother well. No matter how much he caught, it would never be enough. At school, George took his seat. The first thing they practiced was penmanship. George wrote his name neatly on the piece of paper. Spelling was a bit harder for him. He often made mistakes. He spelled oil for oil and smoke for smoke. What if his spelling improved? Would his mother let him go then? George shook his head no. George's favorite subject was mathematics. He liked working with numbers and measuring things. Why, he could measure their whole farm and tell his mother how big it was. Would she let him visit Lawrence then? Probably not. Such a big farm, she would say, would need George to stay home to look after it. But when students had a break from class, George played leapfrog with his friends. When his long legs, George was able to leap pretty high. Would his mother let him go because he jumped higher than anyone else? George didn't think so. Jumping impressed his friends, but it would not impress his mother. The ferry ride from home took only a few minutes, but to George it seemed to take forever. He was out of ideas to convince his mother. As he looked up, he saw his mother riding across a field. Mary Washington loved well and cared deeply about horses. George got an idea. He ran to the farm just as his mother returned. "I'm glad to see our home properly," she said. "I have been thinking more about visiting Lawrence," he said. "I'm sure you have," she replied. During his visit, George explained he would show everyone how much she had taught him about riding. "Wouldn't they be surprised?" said George. His mother paused. She had noticed that George was a fine horseman. Lawrence and his wife would be very impressed with all she had taught him. "Very well," she said. "You may go." Inside his head, George let out a big hooray. But on the outside, he quietly said thank you. Lawrence would be so exciting. There would be porridge and fox hunt. Best of all, he would spend time with Lawrence. George was so glad that his mother approved. This was the first victory of his life. With any luck, he thought, it would not be his last. The end.